pass that item or some other item. Now, as the town grew, they had to start providing more maintenance for the 4th Avenue, which was a main street. And they gravelled it and improved it, took the mud out and replaced it with gravel, did all that, upgraded it. They used to close it for a week or two every spring to let it thaw, and then scrape it smooth and open it again.
I fondly remember, maybe I shouldn't say fondly, all the potholes that would occur on 4th Avenue, and I recall a few instances too where drivers would see somebody on the sidewalk that they knew and head for a pothole and let them have it.
Then somebody proposed paving it, and then we had health people sounding off about how it would allay the dust, it would improve the food and products and everything you buy in the stores by having cleaner conditions, and that's the truth. It was pretty shabby. All this dust got into everywhere.
Yes. One of my jobs, which is totally environmentally irresponsible now, you would find out, but one of the jobs I had to do at the time was each day I would take the drain oil out from the cars that we'd been working on and throw it in the street in 4th Avenue to keep the dust down.
I think it made quite a difference. We had so much dust before and mud, and of course the sidewalks were paved almost from the start of Anchorage, but to have 4th Avenue paved, and they were paved from C Street to K Street, I believe, and it made quite a difference.
And incidentally, a moose walked across the concrete overnight and put his hoof prints down that end somewhere down there. And we were very proud of those. We wouldn't let them knock them out. They got covered up with asphalt. You can't see them anymore. But
back then, it was they were still parking on diagonal parking, I believe, as I recall. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. And you didn't have any much trouble finding a parking place as you do now. And there were you didn't need meter ferries to go around and plug your meters. There were no meters, and you could park as long as you liked.
The construction boom started really late '39, and then through the early 40s, because it first started because the military established Ladd Air Force Base as a cold weather testing station. And in order to do that, they had to upgrade the Alaska Railroad. Then came the construction of Fort Richardson, and then things just started to pyramid from then. But once they started to open up the construction on Fort Richardson in the 40s, early 40s, then this town really took off.
Prior to 1940, we were living off each other, you might say, and there was no great volume of business. But with the military, it brought the populace in, and mostly single GIs, of course. I don't think there were too many dependents here at the time during the war years. It made a big change, where the local business people, Chamber of Commerce, got interested in developing the town, developing the community, building more additions to buildings, remodeling, and things like that. A lot of that took place during that first couple, 3 years.
as they were putting together some of these big buildings out there, they needed all kinds of things. And when they needed them, they needed 100 of this and 100 of that. And then the National Guard would come down from the villages into Anchorage. I understand that they couldn't get paid until they got on the plane to go home. So I would have to give them credit on everything, and I would pack it all up and ship it out to the native villages. And it's amazing how wonderful those people were, because they would keep ordering all during the year for other things. Here we're this little town. We might be 3,500 by January 1940 when first 4 companies arrived, and they brought in their captains and majors, and we had a colonel in charge. General Buckner soon showed up, and his wife, and we all got acquainted. I was after them all for the news, trying to figure out what does the Army do. Other people trying to sell the Army things and everything. We all got acquainted with them one way or another. They brought their kids and they put them in our schools.
I started to get the reports from school teachers about what's happening in the classrooms and how delighted they are to have the Army kids there, because they've been in schools in so many different bases all around the world, and they have enlivened the schoolroom conversations and broadened it, and they're just having a great time. It's good for all the kids. The local boys didn't like it. It's a competition for their girls. But they had to take it, and the place is all spruced up, and they had to learn to compete a bit.
They planned that they would have their utilities in and they would have everything in over a period of time. Men just poured in for the construction money. Families came in, everything came in. So they reached that 30,000 figure in a very short span of time, not in 20 years, in about 3 or 4 years.
We had a volunteer fire department, and whenever the sirens sounded, everybody came out with the radio cradled on their ear to listen to where was it. And eventually KFQD would come on the air and say, well, it's at so-and-so's place. So we'd all go over there and watch the action while the volunteers did their thing with axes and hoses.
It was activity, so people just poured out at night wondering where the fire was, and they'd just trot on down 4th Avenue in their bathrobe.
Fires were big events, and nobody ever missed those.
Anchorage, celebrating a 20-year friendship with South Central Alaska.
Yes, it was very scary. December 7th, I remember so well, in 1941. It was very cold that day, and they had the sirens going, and we all ran out into 4th Avenue and down to Hill Street, overlooking the inlet. And of course, we saw our planes leaving from Fort Richardson.
And they said that our 6 airplanes were headed out toward Coal Bay. 6 airplanes, that was our military.
I remember one day we had 8 air raids, and none of them were practice alerts or anything of the sort. The Japanese were definitely coming, and we were concerned that there would be parachutes and gliders on the park strip, and there was a patrol on every corner.
And here were all of us jittery guardsmen, not knowing what in the Samuel was going on, trying to patrol areas. And it was black, and if there were shadows around, you were a little jittery.
Everybody with a 30-06 and any knowledge of using it was assigned to the various corners of town. And of course, school was let out, and all the kids were told to go home.
And 4th Avenue was completely blacked out. You couldn't see a light, you couldn't see your hand. And that was scary, walking down the street, because you'd never know when you were going to stumble over something.
Had to be completely black. You could get around with flashlights. They would let you have a flashlight to walk down the street, and that's about it, though.
Eventually, I think there was greater terror from the corner patrol with a 30-06 and a little nip or two to keep you warm at each corner than there was from the Japanese, because in the wintertime, in the darkness, there was always, "Who goes there?" And you always answered, "Me, sir, little school child on my way home. I'm not a Japanese. I'm not an infiltrator. It's all right."
And we were called overseas because we were out of the ordinary line of military activity. But oh goodness, there were so many wonderful boys, and there were a lot of boys that didn't come back. And then a USO was built. The USO was really a home for these boys. They lived in one room someplace in town. They didn't have barracks.
Any of the service people couldn't marry, or if they got married, they shipped their wives out. They weren't allowed to have them up here, the families and that.
They were evacuating all the wives because for their security, but basically I think General Buckner had the phone lines checked between Elmendorf and Anchorage to see what was jamming the phone lines, and there were too many wives calling their husbands to go to the commissary and bring home 2 loaves of bread.
Remember, we had a large number of construction people. There was ready money. So we had a heavy concentration of the saloons down around 4th and C and along C Street for a couple of blocks. And along with that came the red light district. And there was a whole string of cribs all the way out from 4th Avenue on C Street out to about 6th. And because we had so many, I mean, there were the single men that were up here. Everybody was after their money.
There were a lot of clubs, and all the clubs had entertainment. They'd have comics, bands. There was a lot of music and comedians. So all the places had entertainment, had live entertainment in those days.
And there were a lot of them that just catered to GIs, and he told me some wonderful stories about the early days where they would have hostesses representing every state. So if you were a lonesome GI from Vermont, you could go in and there would be a hostess from Vermont who would talk Vermont to you and so on.
And then there was entertainment out on the base, of course, during the war, why Bob Hope came here, and I don't know how we got it, but civilians got in to see a lot of those shows that they did out there.
No, like I say, I know this town was quite upset when 42 when Bob Hope came to town, and he made the comment that Anchorage at 4th Avenue was the longest bar in the world.
It wasn't true. No. Well, a lot of bars, but it wasn't the longest bar in the world, you know. I mean, there was...
The longest bar in the world. That's, man, we were featured, I remember, on Confidential magazine as City of Sin. Anchorage was a construction town, and payday in Alaska was, payday in Anchorage was just mobs and mobs of GIs and the military police walking up and down 4th Avenue. It was a boom town in many, many ways.
I like looking in the windows of the pawn shops and seeing all those watches and rings and the things that people would pawn that you just couldn't imagine. You know, if I had nice jewelry like that, I wouldn't be pawning it. But evidently, you know, those people were drinking.
In the 40s, or let's say after 43, you saw very few men on the streets who were not in uniform. And we had a few friends who were conscientious objectors, or some people that were too old or too young, but the young men were predominantly in uniform.
Oh, yeah, lots of soldiers in town, and a great many of them liked Alaska. A lot of them stayed here. They took their discharges here in Anchorage and just stayed in Alaska after they were out.
There were actually 50 airlines then operating out of Anchorage, and they all had the same kind of airplane. It was a surplus DC-3, and they all had the same number in the fleet, 1. And you used to go to one of the bars on 4th Avenue, and you'd write your name down on a list, and they said, "We'll let you know." And at the end of 2 or 3 days, they'd get enough people, 30 or 40 people aboard those DC-3s, and they'd say, "Okay, we're ready to go, Merrill Field at such and such a time," and off you'd go for Annette Island and the 13-hour flight on down to Seattle. So it not only was the longest bar in the world, it was probably the longest and the most raucous travel agency in the world, all the way up and down those same bars on 4th Avenue.
Two popular bars that were the South Seas and Lucian Gardens. They were at the opposite ends of town, and they were very, very popular in the evenings. And of course, one of the early bartenders in the South Seas was Wally Hickle, when he first came to town.
Lucian Gardens was a beautiful nightclub. It was downstairs in the Lido building, Lido Cafe building. Of course, people like to dress up in formal wear and go to the Lucian Gardens.
It was one of the few gathering places in town that was big enough to hold a good-sized group. We could hold probably 150 people in it, and it was all in the basement.
And night after night, if the Japanese had just known about it, they could have taken out a good section of our military by one well-placed bomb on the Lucian Gardens. But it was a lot of fun.
And then the South Seas was down at 4th and G. It was also in the basement there. And it had the atmosphere of a South Sea club and palm trees and everything.
We had, I'd say, 6 or 7 establishments that, that employed musicians, and they were supper clubs such as Starlight Lounge and the Jade Room, and it was sort of it was never really rowdy until the later years on 4th Avenue.
In Seattle, naturally I was asking all kinds of questions, and they said when you get to Anchorage you're going to find people far better dressed there than any place, most any place. And I found that very true, and they had lovely shops all along 4th Avenue and even on the side streets. Betty Ferris was on a side street, and you could buy the most fashionable outfit that you were looking for.
People up here, first of all, had money, and second, it cost as much freight to send something cheap as it did to send something good. And so the clothing was very nice.
The people that owned the stores were the operators also. They were there, the ones that were selling the clothes and waiting on you, and it was really a very sociable affair going out and buying an outfit. You had a good social time also.
And of course the grand place was the Northern Commercial Company. And that had both a grocery store, and it had clothing, and it had furniture, and they allowed you to charge your groceries for the whole month.
And they delivered.
And delivered.
And you just went in there if you wanted to see the latest of jewelry, the latest of cosmetics, the latest of styles, and you just felt like you're in a really uptown type of a place when you went in there. Made you feel good to go in.
And up the street a ways farther, be another couple of clothing stores, Ike Bayless's, Piggly Wiggly store, Meat Market. The Ship Creek Market was a popular place too, to buy meat. Back in those days, I recall from it, the grocery store didn't sell meat. It was up to the butcher shops, they called them back in those days. And then there were several restaurants, like to say the Anchorage Grill, Frisco Cafe and Bar, and Merchant's Cafe, Richmond's. And the Union Club was another popular place too. It would have a small restaurant, but in the back they'd have pool tables, card games, and so on. And just about anything that you needed, it was beyond 4th Avenue.
Up until, say, 1950 and that, my wife and I were running dogs around 4th Avenue, and that even way late at night.
We used to drive the dogs up, just as one would drive an automobile on the main streets of town. They didn't plow it that closely.
Another place on 4th Avenue was Kennedy's hardware store on 4th between D and E. Story goes about Kennedy, somebody coming in and saying, I wanted to buy an axe, and Kennedy says, okay, we got the axe out, and says it'd be whatever the price was, and purchaser said, well, I can get it Sears for half that. And Kennedy said, oh, I'll meet Sears' price. And so he got the package and he wrapped it all up, and he says, that'll be the Sears price plus $1 handling and shipping charge. And the fellow says fine, and paid him. And then Kennedy threw the axe back on the back shelf and says, come back in 3 weeks and you can get it.